I'm recording and I'm taking the minutes. We are good to go.
Thank you much. So at 7:01 on Monday, November 30th, I'll call to order this meeting of the Subcommittee of the Business and Finance Subcommittee in the absence of Chair Dennis, and in accordance with Governor Baker's modified version of the open meeting law, which allows us to meet remotely. So welcome to our members. And before I turn the floor over to Dan, just a quick review of our agenda for tonight. So we're going to hear first about fiscal year 20 updates, E&D update, audit update, hopefully some other issues too in terms of closeout FY21 update. We'll be talking about food services, COVID, other things that were brought up last time, perhaps a little bit about the bus transportation information and how that's being taken care of. Fiscal year 21 enrollment trends and impact to the budget, and then COVID-related expenses as a separate budget item. And we'll see how far we get towards your policy review, Dan. So hopefully we can get this done by a little bit after 9 o'clock would be good. So if we can be efficient but effective, that would be great. So Dan, I'll turn the floor over to you. Maybe we can let Dan talk and then give spaces where he would be willing to take questions after each major topic. Does that seem reasonable, Dan?
Yep, that sounds good. It sounds good. Okay. And I embrace the challenge of being efficient and effective. How's that?
That sounds good. If everybody can be on mute except for Dan, that'd be great.
Alrighty. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. And hope you all had a great Thanksgiving, a safe Thanksgiving. And here we are. Tomorrow's December 1st. Yikes. So the first item of business for FY20 is E&D, and you have in your packet attachment A, which is a copy of the receipt that we submitted to DOR. We did submit our information to our rep on November 23rd. I haven't heard back from her yet. I realize that this is a very busy time of year for DOI reps. They're working with many cities and towns relative to certifying free cash and setting their tax rates. And I did leave a message that certainly those districts, that cities and towns that she's responsible for, they are a priority. I am hoping to connect with her probably later this week or early next week. And then we'll begin the review process relative to E&D. As I had stated in the past for FY20, we cleaned up any deficits that existed through journal entries. So to my knowledge, given what I've submitted to DOR, there aren't any accounts that will be a hit to E&D. And by a hit, I mean that may impact the available balance. So, and as you may know from the past, the review process is give and take, where DOR will have questions and they'll ask for additional backup, perhaps, and again, we submitted to them, a couple weeks ago, all that they had asked for in the past. So hopefully this year will be smooth sailing, and I'm hopeful that we'll have our number certified within the month, hopefully by the end of December, and we'll be actually quite ahead of previous year's schedules with this year's update. I'll be happy to answer any questions on E&D.
I have a couple. Do other members have one first?
Sure. Please.
Seeing none, I'll just throw this out there quickly then. One, I know it's a fluid number, but what did we submit for E&D? Like what's new and what's our total?
So we're estimating approximately 1.4, Ken, but I would not take that to the bank yet. It's not over till it's over, as you know, until it gets certified. And again, if there are any hits to E&D, that will impact that figure.
And where were we last year? What were we certified?
About 1.4, 1.5.
Okay, so about the same. And
yes,
what is the status then of the ongoing open encumbrance for transportation for 20 with regards to E&D?
So that will not impact FY20. That will have an impact on FY21. So let's say, we make a payment, let's just call it $1 million, and we've got 1.4 encumbered for transportation. So the $400,000 would fall to the bottom line for FY21, unless there's a request by towns for some type of an adjustment, and again, we'll cross that bridge for sure.
Okay, and that can't go back into transportation revolving because it was from last year?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Again, if we pay 1.4, we're good to go. If we pay $1 million out of 1.4, it'll just fall to our bottom line for 21.
Do other members have questions about this topic? Okay, thanks, Danny. You want to continue?
The audit, just the audit work continues for FY20. A couple of weeks ago, we sent some information off to our actuaries relative to reviewing OPED and looking at some other financial obligations. They have that information now, and we should have that back from them probably by the end of December. And then that is submitted to Melanson CPAs, and they'll incorporate that into their audit report. And though it's not listed here, again, as part of the audit, would be our end of the year report. Again, as I wrote in the executive summary, attachment B, you have a copy of the receipt that we submitted to DESE, and we submitted our 20th end of the year report on November 15th. And again, this is part of the 20 audit. And it is this will be incorporated into the audit that's due by the end of March. The DESE typically requires the auditors to submit their review of EOR by the end of March as well. So that'll be March 2021.
Are there any questions from the subcommittee about the audit, or does AAB have anything to add?
Let's see. So as it relates, I guess, to the audit, Dan, you'll have to let us know when there's enough information to get the audit group together.
Yep.
For the first review.
Yep. I have a draft, Ben, of the document that we've been talking about. It's fairly extensive. And I need a little bit more time just to fine tune some aspects of that. But I hopefully get it done in the next week or so. And for the larger group, what Ben is referring to is that one of the findings, if you will, was that we didn't have a financial procedurals manual, especially relative to student activities. There were, as you may recall, there were 8 findings relative to student activities. So we basically had to start from scratch and document in black and white, in a manual processes and procedures. So that's what Ben's referring to.
So yeah, as soon as you get something that you can send out for review to the audit committee, because we've been waiting kind of to have we were going to have a follow-up if everything was normal sometime in the October-November timeframe. So as soon as we can kind of close the books on the previous audit, then we'll be ready to start off on the 2020.
Yep.
I have 2 questions. I don't want to, if you're done with that part. I do have a question about the audit, since you mentioned that, and also about the end of year report. I'm curious if when you anticipate that we would be able to view the end of year report. Last year, I looked in my notes and I believe it was presented to the school committee in January. So I didn't know your timeline on that, on viewing that. And my other question was about the student activities piece of the audit, because I think about 6 or 8 weeks ago, you said it was on your list to do, and I know that list is lengthy. But it seems like it keeps getting pushed off. So I'm curious about the timeline and making sure we don't miss that.
So I'll start with the second question first, Malaya. It's not been pushed off. As I said a moment ago, I have a draft document. I could. Hello.
Yep.
Okay. I have a draft document. I could send it out tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I could send it out tonight. It's not done, but if someone wants to look at a draft, you're more than welcome to look at a 100-page document. Not a problem whatsoever. It's just not done, but it's got all that in there relative to student activities, to federal grants, and the full 9 yards. You know, it's just, I'm not using it as an excuse. It's just been busy, just crazy.
No,
Secondly,
that's good to know that
relative,
it's in process. So
it's, if you want to see a draft, I could
No.
send it tonight.
I don't need to.
It's
I
draft.
just wanted to check.
Yep. End of the year. If you want to see the end of the year report tomorrow, I'm happy to do that. But it's not been audited. What you would see would be the report that was submitted to DESE a couple of weeks ago, knowing that it's not been audited. When will it get audited? I don't know. You know, probably won't be into January, February. That Melanson will look at that. But if you want to look at the unaudited report, you're welcome to look at that. I can send it out tomorrow morning.
Yeah, I don't recall if last year it was done before or after it was audited. I just looked at my notes and it was January, so I was just curious of the timing. So
yeah, you know, I can I'll speak to the superintendent tomorrow. You know, Malaya, I don't recall either if last year when you saw it in January, my guess at that time was probably audited, but you know, I can certainly speak to the auditors tomorrow to see where they think they will squeeze that into the schedule. I doubt very much that they'll get to it the next couple of weeks. There's some other matters in the 20 audit that they're working on now.
okay, thank you.
Hey Dan, one quick question, and this kind of builds off something that Ken had mentioned, I think maybe a couple meetings back. How many years have we been using Melanson for our auditors?
This is the third year.
Okay, and yeah, I guess at some point, I mean, probably good to, as Ken had mentioned, maybe looking at changing maybe at some point down the road. But I guess 3 years in, it's probably not something we'd want to look at. But I mean,
so the way that procurement was done is that there were 3 years and then 2 option years for a total of 5 years. That's how the procurement was done a couple of years ago. Just sharing that with you. That's
okay.
all. And
right.
Understood. It makes perfect sense to you know look at your auditors and make changes periodically. I applaud that. It does make sense to get a different set of eyes. That's for sure.
All right, yeah, I just didn't know if it was like 3 years or 13 years and a little bit of a difference. So, all right, thanks, appreciate it.
All right, do you want to move into 21?
Alrighty. I guess, Ken, if I can just throw in 1 or 2 things, though it's not here, just relative
Sure.
to FY20. Talk about the bus settlement. We have a meeting tomorrow evening, legal sub, to talk about the latest updates. As you know, our counsel, Attorney Bartulis, has been working with their counsel, and so we'll be going into executive session tomorrow night to discuss the updates there. I can say this, that the focus has been primarily on AA transportation and working on that. As you know, we still need to work with Vanpool and work out some settlement with them as well. So that is in process, and hopefully we'll have some news tomorrow night that we can bring forward to the full committee next week.
Okay, well, we probably shouldn't ask about that. So what else do you have for 20?
That's pretty much a wrap for FY20, Ken.
Okay. Well, thanks for all your work. I know you spent a couple of hours meeting with the bus folks, so thanks for your continued efforts there. And we'll look forward to hearing what the outcome is at our full meeting of the committee. So are you ready for 21?
Sure thing. So let's shift gears for a second and let me pull up this. I just want to make sure that everyone can see an Excel document. And if I take my cursor, you're going to see Model A, and then down here, Model B. Just want to make sure that you all see that.
We do.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I met with Director Barton, Food Service Director, and she did, and this is a follow-up to a discussion from our previous meeting, and it's all tied into 21. We have two scenarios here. The first scenario, Model A, represents the hybrid learning model commencing in January through June. And then the second model here, and this is also in your packet as well. This was attachment C in the packet. The second projection that she did is reflective of remote learning. Again, we made an assumption from the middle of January 19th until June of 2021. And again, you know, like everything else, these are assumptions based upon the information that we know at that time. So to your right, you'll see under the notes columns, again, she used an average of 1,000 meals a day. The 365 is the amount that the district would have been, will be reimbursed for the lunch only. And then the 95 days would be the period from November to June. And again, I guess just to scroll down to the bottom line here, if you look at this model here, she is projecting a shortfall here of approximately $136,359 for the year. In Model B, the one change is the reimbursement rate. And again, this number here is $5.53 per meal. And the reason for the difference is that this model here would be reflective of both breakfast and lunch in terms of being reimbursed. The 38% revenue that she used in both models, both Model A and in B, again, it's up here as well, is that that is the average of food cost, and that's what she used to do her projections here. Obviously, in this model here, the deficit, the projected deficit, is greater. It's just over $462,000 and change. So the question becomes, okay, so how do you plan? What is the game plan? And in either case, what we would look to do is to shift the labor costs in either model from school lunch into the general fund for the balance of the year. And again, we'll probably have a better handle on this in the next couple of weeks at the latest. One of the changes that we did make, and again, if you look at my cursor here, is for the director's salary. We're paying the balance of her salary in the general fund. What we may do as well is that this is the value, the $24,369 is the value that's been paid to date and charged to school lunch, and we may look to journal that out of here and back into the general fund, and again pick up about $24,000 and change. And again, the same is down here as well, where we've got Margaret's salary for the balance of the year would be charged off to the general fund. So again, the big figure here in terms of both models is, to address the potential shortfall is, what would you do? And again, under the first model, Model A, in this moment in time, I would look to shift labor cost of either 719,000 listed here under Model A, or under Model B, 678 and change into the general fund. And again, when we get into the general fund and you look at the balances, you'll see why I'm recommending that. Obviously, the school lunch account cannot end up in deficit at the end of the fiscal year. So it will be incumbent upon us if either we shift labor costs, or for that matter, if we shift expenses, but they would have to be shifted into the general fund. And of course, this takes into account that for FY21, we are not charging, as in past years, any benefits, health insurance, for example, of staff to the revolving account. That those costs are being absorbed at 100% by the general fund. So I'm going to stop here for a minute, and I'd be happy to answer any questions relative to school lunch.
I have a few, but I'll let the committee go first. Anyone? Ben?
Yeah.
Yeah, after Ben.
Go ahead, Malaya.
No, you can go first. It's fine.
Okay. One quick question is what are, so I see that we're fully staffed at a price tag of, almost 600,000 November to June 2021. What are those individuals doing?
So the way in the note says, Ben, she made an assumption that all of her positions are filled. She does have some vacancies that she's looking to backfill, and there were some staff that she did let go. But we are in the buildings. We are involved with the grab and go meals now, and they're also, as you know, we have a number of special needs students who are in the building. So for the purpose of the exercise, as I highlighted here, all of her positions were filled, but she does have some vacancies that she's looking to backfill.
Yeah, I think I'm asking a little different question. How many people are actually working in the buildings daily? I mean, we're right now as a school district probably less than what, 10% of the students, maybe 20% at a high end of it. I'm just trying to understand how many actual people are in buildings doing work as of today. And really, I guess the question is let's, based on our plan, they'll be there till January. The expectation is as we go to hybrid in January, but from a high school standpoint, there is no lunch, right? You'll have people that will pick up, but that whole lunch thing has now gone away. So I guess, from that standpoint, what are we doing with the high school? Because we're no longer having lunches there. Everyone's leaving at 11:30. And then for the other school, everyone's eating in classrooms and stuff. So again, I'm just trying to understand. I see that we have a labor cost here, and are we doing anything to say, well, right now we're not using these individuals, and how are we going to save money?
So the labor costs that are identified here, again, based on the assumption that all of her positions are staffed. So we can certainly revisit these labor costs, and we can base the labor cost on the actual number of staff that she has in the buildings. And I can give you a more definitive number in terms of her vacancies and who she's looking to backfill.
Okay, that would be helpful. I appreciate that. And I guess one other request would be is, should we put a hold on any hiring? I would, this is not a good time. Should we, have Daryl have to approve any positions that are hired? So ideally, there are no backfills right now. Again, I'm not sure what the conversation has been, but I would think right now we wouldn't want to arbitrarily fill any positions. That would just be fiscally irresponsible of us.
Understood, Ben, but one of the challenges too is that there have been some situations where staff have become ill, and we've needed to get bodies to wherever to do the work. Trying to be respectful of some of the challenges that are out there.
Okay. Again, I just want to make sure we're not overstaffing just in case, because we really don't have a lot of money.
Yeah, correct.
Leah? Yeah.
Yeah, I stared at these numbers for a long time, and maybe I'm just tired. I'm trying to understand where some of this is coming from, and some of it is definitely clear. But is part of the situation because we're not getting reimbursed as much as we would make by charging for the meals during a regular year?
Yes.
Or am I missing something?
No, that's correct, Malaya. That's correct.
That's what I'm trying to understand. I was like, something is missing from this document. Okay. So that's where the bulk of this is coming from. So we're assuming a certain number of students will be eating that usually would be paying us, and that's less than we're getting reimbursed through the federal program because they only pay for food.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah. There are a couple of assumptions here, and again, in Model A, she used the one figure, the 363. For reimbursement. I mean, typically, there's also a la carte that should be reimbursed for, and some other meals that should be reimbursed for. And the same as well for the second. She just used the one figure in terms of calculating those costs for the year. And again, trying to look at this from 50,000 feet and to bring forward our best projections at this moment in time. So there were just two numbers used, and typically the reimbursements, as you may know, there are several other figures that come into that depending upon the nature of the product that's been sold.
Right.
Okay. Not to step on Malaya, but just to follow up on that question real quick, and I'll come right back to Malaya. I thought the high school lunches, if you're paying for them though, you only charge $3.50, right? And less at the middle schools. So help me understand that.
The figure is the same across the board. I don't have I wish I did. I don't have the sheet here in front of me, but I'll get that sheet. And all these lunches are free. So this is the federal reimbursement rate based upon the free lunch, and again, based upon an X number of students to be served each day.
But it just seems like it's less than the a la carte. Like if a kid who doesn't normally get free or reduced was to go into the cafeteria at Wachusett, it would be $3.50, right?
Yep.
So it seems like it's better than if they were paying cash, I guess is my question. So I'm sorry, Malaya, I was just following up on your question about that because it seems related. Yeah.
It makes sense.
Because I guess my question to pull off of Malaya, and then I'm sorry, right back to you, is like, are we better off giving away more meals or not? Like, are we losing money every time we hand out a package, or are we making money? Because I could argue, like, if we're giving only 1,000 meals away right now, and you're really giving them away, if we could work more to give more away, right? Like, would we be making more money, or would we be losing more money?
You'd have to look at the labor cost. You'd have to look at the product cost. Certainly, I can speak to Margaret. We can look at that. And again, these figures were made on an assumption of 1,000 meals a day or 2,000 meals a day. I hear your point that if that were 3,000 meals a day, would that not help our bottom line? My quick and dirty answer would be it should. It should, but we have to take into account again the costs for the paper product and the materials, as well.
Hey Dan, I'm sorry to jump in. Just because I was just crunching some numbers on that as well. I mean, if you take, not including the labor costs, it looks like we net basically like $1.78 for every meal that gets delivered. And so it would seem like more meals would generate, in this case, more revenue, because based on subtracting out the food cost plus the paper and the other costs, you get 178. So it seems like there could be a benefit to it, encouraging more folks to, and especially if this number here has like the salary kind of already worked into it, that there seems to be, it seems like there'd be a benefit to having more folks pick up a free meal from the money side of it.
Understood. And again, she used the figure of 1,000 meals a day. These are estimates and not actuals, and it could be 2,000 meals a day, which would clearly have a positive impact on the bottom line here, without doubt.
Well, I'm sorry, we jumped in on you there. Do you want to go back
It's
to
all related. It's fine. So I guess my follow-up question was about the 1,000 meals and how, I know you have to estimate somewhere, but how does that compare to what we're doing now with, for instance, with the grab and go? Are we doing 1,000 meals across the district? Are we doing less? Do we have any, did we ask I don't think we asked families about meals, but do we have, how does that compare to what we're doing now, and what is our basis for that? I'm
So Malay, if you
curious.
look at in both scenarios, the July through October actuals, for example, on the Model A, 157,000, and those are actual figures, and then look at the projections for the balance of the year.
I was more concerned with the number of students or meals if we were actually doing 1,000, but if it's generally based on what we've been doing, then that makes sense.
I can speak to Margaret and get you the actual numbers now that drove this figure here, for example. I'll get that.
That would be helpful just to know that compares to what we're doing now. I also have heard, and I actually wrote to, I think, Daryl and Margaret about this at some point and heard from her, that some families this fall were not aware that we were doing this, and then were not aware even in October and early November that we were still doing this grab and go situation. The information on our website was not up to date. So I would, and I know she's updated it now that we've decided to postpone the hybrid. But I think if we do continue to this needs to be a big flashing announcement on the front of our webpage, telling people how they can access it, because I followed the links myself, and the link took you to a page that had drop-off instructions, but it didn't tell you how to sign up for this if you wanted to add yourself to this list to get lunches or breakfast or whatever meals we were offering. It was, I think they had to call her, but it was still like 2 steps to figure out how, and it should be a big flashing notice on the front of our webpage if we are going to be doing this for some time, so families can find it.
I will. I'll speak with Margaret tomorrow morning, and we'll look at that and get that fixed.
Ben, do you have a question?
Yeah. One other question. It looks like all these, as I was reviewing this, all these numbers are based on a projection of X amount of meals and X amount of dollars reimbursement, and that's, at the end of the day, if I look at this, it really comes down to how many meals are we going to send out, and the question I had was around the drop off, and it's more or less I'm not fully understanding this meal. Are these reimbursed meals only valid for people that are free or reduced, or is this reimbursement literally anybody who picks up a meal we get this reimbursement?
Anyone who picks up a meal, we get reimbursed. All meals are free this year through June of 21.
So then I guess there should be a sales pitch, as kind of Malaya was pointing out a little, that says, okay, we have this fixed cost line down here. we need to get X amount of meals out a day. How are we going to do that? Whether we're in hybrid or remote. I mean, at the end of the day, another way to think about it is if we go to hybrid in high school, every kid gets a meal, right? Every single kid gets a meal in high school. Whether you want it or not, you're going to get a meal. I don't know. You know, it's just economics at this point, right? It literally is we have a fixed cost that we have to cover. And in both scenarios, it doesn't look like we're covering it. So I think, you know, again, we have to figure out a way, whether that's educating the community or just making it so everyone grabs a meal. Because right now, the problem I see is that we're not looking at reducing staff. But in the way I would do this, running a business is, well, if you're going to come up that short, how many people are we getting rid of? And unfortunately, I feel like we're just going to drive this into a deficit, and it just doesn't. It seems simple, and I'm probably missing stuff, but at the end of the day, we have to figure out how to cover the costs in this area.
If we can hear soon, I don't know if the next meeting is too long, because I don't know when Mike intends to have it, but I was going along the same lines as Ben was saying. Like, you know, every kid who leaves the high school, they just, at the door, there's a carton and you just pick it up, click, 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 right? And whether that food goes home to a younger sibling or whomever, that's not our business, right? We put good food into the community. If we're getting reimbursed and there's no cap and we have a fixed cost already with the labor, right? And we're just, and it's just, you know, amortizing that cost across more revenue. All the other schools too. A part of the reasons districts like Worcester go to universal free lunches, right, is because there's no paperwork, right? Everybody gets it. Here you go, right? And it just seems straightforward. So if you could model for us if we are missing something obvious, right? It seems as though we've already fixed in all the labor costs, as long as they can actually handle the different type of labor, you know, just everybody gets a lunch. I mean, no signups, no questions, no verifications. You know, good food to everybody if the government's going to pay for it and it covers our costs. So if we could have a sense, like, and it's putting you in a spot right now to do that analysis. You know, Margaret may say, well, we have to hire twice as many people to do that because we have to put them in containers, and that takes 3 times as long as dishing it out as kids come through a line. I don't know what the answer to that is, but if you could figure that out for us, I think that'd be important for the district in, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars kind of way. The other question I had about costs is, since we have to like do these carry out costs and there are more costs for the plastic containers and whatnot, is any of that reimbursable to COVID grants, since it's something we wouldn't normally do?
So, and we'll talk about the COVID grants in a little bit. We did write into the school reopening grant, which is the larger grant, as you may have seen from the packet, a value approximately $112,000 for labor costs. So, you know, those costs are being assumed by that grant. So this is independent of those costs there.
Okay. So, do anybody else want to follow up on this topic? All right. So, you want to carry on?
All right. Good to go in terms of school lunch. All right. So moving on to the revenue, attachment D is a copy of the revenue budget report. I'll scroll down that for the public to view. And again, as I typically do, I then run that same report and convert it to an Excel document to do my projections. As I've stated in the past, Chapter 70 figure, the one, and this is the governor's number, and then the House and Senate numbers as well. And though the state budget is not finalized yet, we can basically take to the bank the fact that our Chapter 70 is going to be almost $409,000 below what was in our approved budget. And again, our approved budget is reflective of the governor's FY21 House budget that was released last January. Secondly, as I've stated in the past, and as the committee knows, the DESE, we had to repay the DESE given the issue from FY18. As you recall, that when I began, that was one of the first matters that hit me. It was the first matter that hit me. The DESE did make one adjustment 2 years ago, but they didn't make an adjustment in FY20. So they will need to make that second adjustment for regional transportation this year, approximately $135,000. The House and Senate numbers for regional transportation were the same, in approximately 2.4 million. But again, it's unknown at this point in time as to where we will land with regional transportation in 21. In one version of the state budget, I believe it was the House, I'll stand corrected, they bumped up regional transportation by $3 million over the governor's budget, and then they reduced circuit breaker. Then I believe it was in the Senate budget where they increased circuit breaker and they reduced regional transportation. So obviously the compromise committee will need to sort that, what the final number will be for regional transportation. But again, as has been stated in the past, going back to the payment from last spring with AA Transportation, having not made that payment in FY20 will impact the revenues for FY21. And then, as I point out here too, in terms of our charter reimbursement, we're looking at just a tad under $60,000 of an increase. The House and Senate versions of the state budget had a slightly greater number, about a $3,300 difference from the governor's number. So I used the lower figure in terms of estimating what our charter reimbursement will be. In terms of Medicaid, again, we received our first payment about a month or so ago of almost $76,000. We will be receiving a second payment towards the end of December, and I'll have more information on Medicaid and where we'll be at that meeting. So as of now, this snapshot in time, where we're looking at a revenue shortfall of approximately $484,000 in change. And again, the state budget has not been finalized yet, but there are some figures here, especially Chapter 70, where I feel very comfortable that these figures will hold for the balance of the year. Before I go into the expenses, Ken, I'd be happy to speak to any questions on the revenue side.
I had one quick question. Is the $408,000 in Chapter 70 all from the Student Opportunity Act funds? Or
yes, it is. Yep. Thank you. Thank you. That was the increase in this year's Chapter 70. And that was based upon the implementation of the SOA. As you know from our previous discussions, the state has delayed the implementation of the SOA, and that not only impacts Chapter 70, but it also impacts circuit breaker, because this year would have been the first of a 4-year phase-in for reimbursing transportation, and that as well has been put on hold for FY21, and we don't have any guidance at this point yet as to where we will be with FY22.
So I know regional transportation is very fluid, but I still have this concern about the fact that we didn't pay last year, right? So where is the cherry sheet number coming from for regional transportation? Are they already baked in the fact that we didn't make a payment in 20, or is that still to come?
So that's still to come, Ken. That the 2.4. Go back to that. I apologize. The 2.4 million that's on the cherry sheet, that does not take into account the repayment of $1.35.
But does it take into account the fact, like, what are they basing their number on? Like, because I know if we don't pay them for last year, right? Have they already taken account the fact, and them being AA, not and Vanpool, not the state? So is this year's numbers already based on a lowered cost from last year, or
No, it's not.
How does that play in?
No, it's not. So the 2.4, frankly, is a figure that Jay Sullivan shares, who's the Associate Executive Director for School Finance in DESE, shares with DOR. And typically, previous year's payments are what he may use as the basis for that figure. But that 2.4, as I note here, does not take into account the $135,000 repayment, nor does it take into account the figure that I reported on chapter in Schedule 7 of the end of the year report in terms of the payment made for homeschool transportation for last year. The DESE, again, they won't know what the disbursements will be until all those reports are in, and they can look at what their potential obligations are vis-a-vis what they have for revenues.
So I guess I have two questions related to that, and I apologize if they're not the right questions. But one, so say you have executive session tomorrow, we come to some agreement, we're using 20 money. Can we revise the EOR to note what we paid? Is question one. And question two, if we can't, what's our potential exposure in the change in 21 from this? Like, what's the worst case scenario for how low this number could go based just on that difference? I know it's fluid for the reimbursement percentage.
So in terms of the first question, I did ask that question when I was working on my EOR, that if we were to make a payment, could I amend my Schedule 7? And hopefully an amending Schedule 7 showing a greater figure that was paid out of FY20, because these dollars are encumbered, because that would certainly help us. And the DESE said no, that any payment, if it is made this year, though the money is rolled forward, would impact FY21, as I stated earlier in this discussion. I haven't closed the door on that argument, though. And I'd like to, I didn't speak with Mr. Sullivan. I spoke with one of his staff about this, because I would argue that the money is fully encumbered. I mean, whether we paid in July 21st or December 21st, it's there from FY20, in where the regional transportation process is a fluid process. I was thinking, which my logical mind was thinking, that, okay, we make the payment, whatever the number is, and it won't help us with the first disbursement in January, February, but hopefully it'll help us in some capacity for the second disbursement in June. So that's going to be my argument, and though I've been told no, it's not going to help you in 21. I'm not accepting no in a nice way. And I'm sorry, Ken,
Well, good. I hope that you wouldn't, because I agree with what you're saying. Seems logical. So if they do say no, do you have a sense of the worst case scenario? Like, I guess is the question I'm asking. Because I always like to have a sense of what the worst case is and then be happy when it's not that, right?
And right, so there is a worksheet that I use when I work on Schedule 7, and again, I use low figures, conservative figures. I use 65 or 70%. I mean, last year, I think at the end of the day, when all was said and done, our total reimbursements was about at or about 84%, I believe it was. So if you use my lower reimbursement rate, could be upwards of $800,000 shot off of the 2.4. But there is still time ahead of us, and I think that's the question you're asking: is what's worst case scenario? $800,000, but don't take that to the bank. I guess we'll have a better sense in a month or so when the first disbursement is released, and we'll have a sense as to where we think we might land. But that's at 7:52 on November 30. That's what I'm looking at, and I hope that I'm wrong.
I mean, I think it's better for the committee to know there is some small potential of $800,000 more in exposure than to find out about that in June, right? So, and I know it's fluid, right? But it's good that we're talking about it, and I'm sure you're 2 o'clock in the morning thinking about where is this money coming from is something we don't have to ask you to do, because I'm sure you're doing it. But
oh, you knew that I'm up at 2 o'clock in the morning thinking about that? How'd you know that? Little levity. 800,000 plus is my worry.
on that happy note, that was my question. Does anybody have other? Sorry to probe the $800,000 question, but does anybody have other questions about this?
Sorry, I do have a question related. I'm trying to think through how to ask this. Oh, okay. This might be related to other discussions, but how fluid are these numbers given that we're not actually in school now? Are these based on, I guess I'm trying to understand how the current situation, which is mentioned later in your report, so maybe you'll get to this.
I will, Maria. Yep.
You will? Okay, I
Yep.
can wait till then.
Yep.
That goes through my head because these are
Sure.
based on assumptions, but we're not in school. We're in the same situation we were in the spring, and at least this committee is not knowledgeable about what is happening with that.
Sure,
So,
I'm happy to.
I can wait.
Actually, I'm going to get into that now on the expense side here. Anything else on the revenue side?
No, I'm sorry.
That's okay. We're good to go, Ken?
Yes, let's go. Sounds good.
All right. So on the expense side, again, salaries and stipends, we're looking, as of the 24th of November, there was an available budget of 4.3 million. But as I wrote in my executive summary, there are some other adjustments that still need to happen. Number one, we're not able to encumber our day-to-day subs, so that's 400,000 right there. And again, I'm projecting out that that when we return in January, that we're going to need at least 400,000. Number two, there are still a number of vacancies that have yet to be filled. Number three, there are a number of contracts that have yet to be resolved, both bargaining units and also some individual contracts. Number four, there are still some winter and spring coaches' salaries that have not been fully encumbered. Number five, I also, when looking at that available balance, the 4.3, I made an assumption, again, just projecting out that if we had to make an adjustment in school lunch, that we would shift, the better part of $700,000 in salaries from from the revolving into the general fund. And again, this is in my executive summary. So when you back out these figures, I'm showing an unofficial balance of approximately 2.3, almost $2.4 million. That does not take into account either, though, any response to COVID, perhaps the need for more medical staff, more nursing staff. And again, I know that we're in the process of hiring a nurse manager, so that's, that'll come off the top. But so for salaries and stipends, this moment in time, and again, it's in my executive summary. We're looking at just under 2.4. On the benefits side, again, as you can see, there's a shortfall there of almost $411,000. We have yet to make any adjustments between the general fund and school choice. We did build the 21 budget using school choice as an offset. As of November 25th, there was a balance in school choice of just under $450,000. And again, that's based upon the carry forward in year-to-date payments. So those adjustments haven't been made and will be made. Instructional support, again, just under 1.4 million, 1,353,778 cents. And as I've stated in the past, there are three areas where they're generating most of that. Number one, textbooks, although Deputy Superintendent Burlow has begun to expend those dollars, but there's still a balance in the textbook line of $625,000. Secondly, the general supplies, what the principals have, there's still a balance in there of $223,000. And then also in terms of special education contracted services, there's still a balance in there of approximately $484,000 and change. So those three lines, and there are some shortfalls, but the net is still the almost 1.4 million. But those three lines are the primary contributors to that balance there. Again, Deputy Superintendent Burlow has begun to expend textbook dollars in anticipation of the return on the middle of January. Operations and maintenance, $544,000. There's still work that's ongoing in the buildings, and secondly, one of the other balances is in the fuel line. Winter is knocking on our door. Even you can kind of feel it out there tonight with the wind and the rain and the cold. I mean, if this were snow, I can only imagine how much snow we'd have out there. So that 544, I can see that going quickly as we get into the heart of the winter for sure. Pupil services, there's a small balance there, and those dollars will be spent in the next couple of weeks. Tuitions, again, we built the 21 budget using the 240 grant as an offset, the carry forward from FY20 as an offset, and also this year's allocation of circuit breaker. We've yet to make any adjustments between the general fund and circuit breaker, as I wrote in my executive summary. So we'll be looking to make those adjustments as well. And if you've gone through my my executive summary, you'll see that we received first payments for circuit breaker this year. It's approximately almost $780,000, and I apologize, but that's my landline that's ringing in the background here. So again, we'll make those adjustments. I do have a goal this year of once again bringing forward a sum of money from both circuit breaker, FY21 circuit breaker, as well as looking to bring forward a sum of money out of school choice. As you know, when you bring forward circuit breaker, you can bring it forward for 1 year, and you have to use it the following year. So the million plus that we brought forward from FY20, we have in essence already spent those dollars. Other operating costs, these are fluid figures. Again, these are from the cherry sheet. These are the assessments for DOR, for charter schools and for school choice out. And we review these on a monthly basis. Given what was in the budget, what we built the budget on going back to last January, we are showing a shortfall there of 100, almost 155, well, 155, 481. But we will continue to refine those figures as we go through the year. And I'm going to skip over transportation for a nanosecond and then talk about debt. And again, the debt is fully encumbered for the balance of the year. Transportation. So right now, we show a balance of just under $2 million, 1.9, and as part of transportation, we have fully encumbered our sped in district, and also our sped out of district, and we've also fully encumbered the home to school. Given the information that we knew back in September. But to Malaya's point, obviously the buses have not been running this year, and right now they're not expected to run until the middle of January. The home to school, the budgeted amount for home to school this year was approximately 4.1 million. I'm estimating, again, given the return to school on January 19th, again, running the buses 4 days a week now, not 5, but 4 days a week, that we'll spend just under 1.8, 1,775, 275. Which leaves us with a balance in the home to school projected of 2.3. The encumbrances have not been adjusted yet to reflect any of these, so we'll need to make those adjustments accordingly as well. So, but on that same note, I do want to point out that. Perhaps I mentioned this at our last meeting, that the legislation that was filed last spring that in essence allowed municipalities to make readiness payments, if you will, to transportation providers and also to contractors in the event that we returned last spring. That expired on June 30, but there was legislation recently passed that the governor signed, which once again relaxes the requirements of Chapter 4156. In essence, you can't pay for goods and services if they haven't been delivered. So what that means is that there is the situation, once we resolve the FY20 matter, where AA may, keyword may, want to sit down and negotiate some type of a settlement agreement, again, on some type of a payment for the days that the buses weren't running to keep him liquid, because again, we're one of the fewer districts, one of his larger districts where, the buses at this point, the larger buses won't be running until at least January 19th. I'm going to stop there for a second, come up for a breath of air, fresh, and I'd be happy to answer any questions here.
All right, folks, what do we have?
Can I ask, I'm jumping ahead. So have we paid AA at all for the fall? Because we
No.
weren't running any buses, so we haven't
No.
paid them.
No, correct. Right.
And okay, I know in the spring we spent a lot of time discussing this and the impact on the budget, and now it is sitting with legal. So will any decision about what to do about this fall also originate from legal, or will we be having the same discussion we had in the spring?
You know, Malaya, that's a great question. I actually thought about that today.
Because we talked about that in the spring, and then
Yeah.
somehow things changed, and so I'm very curious about process-wise what we need to be paying attention to.
Yeah. I don't have an answer for you tonight regarding that. I don't.
It's fine.
I don't.
I only asked because I know it's probably not entirely up to you. I don't know how that all transpired, but
Right.
I know in the spring, one of our key questions was, will whatever we decide in the spring apply to the fall? And the assumption was probably, but we don't really know until we see what the fall brings. And here we are. So I just don't want us to be sitting in June having the same discussions we were having all spring and still unresolved.
Sure. I'm just trying to be respectful of the process that's going on, the fact that, you know, it's in negotiations. But what I can say relative to 21 is I believe AA is hopeful that whatever happens relative to 20, that there can be similar type discussions relative to 21 as well. I mean, that's been stated to me by Mr. Ernenwein. Independent of what happens in 20, if we can at least talk about this, because not having these buses run, you know, at least until the middle of January, and again, subject to change, will have an impact on his operation.
And I was really mostly curious from a budget standpoint and planning standpoint, because in, you know, not too long, we're going to be talking about next year even, and all of this trickles down.
Right.
And we just have no idea right now. So I was just curious timing wise. So
and Malaya also, and for the full committee, basically, I've had the same request made of me from Vanpool, who, you know, as you know, is primary, and AA has a couple of small routes for out of district, but primarily it's Vanpool. He's got a big piece of the pie, so to speak. And he's actually, I mean, I can say this, he's actually sent me an MOU asking me to sign it and asking me to agree to paying, you know, X percent for the days that the vans aren't running, and so on and so forth. And I said, I can't even go down that road. So he also, again, independent of what happens in 20, he's also in the same position where, hey, you know, the vans didn't run as much as they did before. The vans aren't running this day. So here's a 3-page MOU, and we're asking you to make to us a readiness payment, my term, based upon 50% of the daily rate. And I said, no, can't touch it, at least not now. So there's an expectation on his part.
We figure it out, yeah, because they need to plan also.
I'm sorry?
I mean, they need to plan also, because we're one of their bigger customers, and clearly they need to plan, you know, as well. So thank you.
And again, he has stated to me, and no, they're not talking to each other, but they're all part of a professional organization. And he has stated to me as well, he has reminded me as well, hey, Dan, just a reminder that the governor did sign the legislation, which basically relaxes the requirements of 4156 through the end of this June as well. So hopefully we can come to some agreement and come to some readiness payment as well for the vans. So it's out there.
Well, if you can continue to update us, I mean, this is obviously complicated because it's on both sides of the ledgers, right? Revenue and expense, because they're connected when there's a reimbursement percentage, right? Which, because the reimbursement percentage of a different percentage, you know, blathering, which it's complicated on both sides of the ledger, right? The other question that Malaya hinted at, which maybe isn't a conversation for tonight, and you may have no answer about, is how this all, of course, affects planning for 22. You know, assuming that we are back in school full time in September of 21, you know, we're going to have the same expenses we normally would have had but we're going to be based off of a previous year where we had significantly lower expenses, and that makes me exceedingly nervous, right, about what 22 will look like. I don't know if it's a question or just an observation, but
So I can make a comment on that, and my comment on that is one of my goals as well for this year, and I think this is for the larger committee, or certainly for this committee here, is that we would need to, once we sort all this out relative to home to school transportation, number one, sort out FY20, whatever the final resolve is, sort it out and be done with it. Done. And then we have to respond to 21 because both vendors are expecting something, at least having discussions. And as I said a moment ago, one vendor has even given me an MOU, said sign, and I said I ain't signing anything. But clearly there is an expectation of having conversation. But the goal relative to 22 is that we would need to identify in 21 a sum of money, and probably do it sooner than later. And by that I mean sometime in the spring and not on June 30. Identify a sum of money that we can transfer into the transportation stabilization account. As you know, we transferred $1.50 this year, and we'll need to expend that this year when the buses roll. I mean, that's the first place that we'll hit, because we need to get that off the books. But whatever the balance remains in the home to school line, we'll need to have those discussions to see what's the value. And I'm advocating, I'm arguing that we do another transfer in 21 for the 22 budget of a sum of money into transportation stabilization.
probably a big one too. If we can, yeah. Not 150, but like times 10.
Right, and understood. And
Yeah.
I think that's certainly something that we can discuss, especially after we get resolved FY21, and are we or are we not making a readiness payment, so to speak, to AA, and for that matter, Vanpool, for sure.
Are there other questions on this topic? All right, Danny, want to continue?
All right, gonna jump down to attachment, the budget calendar. Well, actually, before I leave this, Ken, you should all see, and this was in my packet as well. I prepared for the committee a snapshot of the entire budget, if you will, not only the general fund but also special revenue funds, and this here, and again, it's in the packet. You can see the budget here, 102 million. The estimated revenue shortfall, 484,000. Again, the big hit there again is Chapter 70. But then I looked at all the special revenues and again the federal grants, the state grants, and all the revolving funds. And as you can see, under the federal grants, the big addition there is the school reopening grant for FY21. Under the state grants, the big addition there again is a COVID-related grant, and again I'll talk more about that when we get into discussion on COVID. The circuit breaker, again, when we built the budget, we were looking at approximately 3.7 this year, and we're looking at about 4 million this year, and that includes the carry forward. Skip down to school choice, and again, the cherry sheet number is only an estimate. It's only a projection, and again, we're looking to pick up approximately $73,000. But as the committee knows, these figures are adjusted during the year because there are several reportings made to DESE during the year, and that impacts our reimbursement. And then, as we discussed earlier, school lunch, and again, using a lower figure there, approximately 334,000. Again, that's a fluid number in terms of school lunch. So this was a kind of a one-page summary of both the general fund, but all funds, including the special revenue funds, in terms of FY21. This is something that Mike had talked about at the last meeting. Attachment H is the budget calendar.
Dan,
Yes,
Dan, can I ask a quick question about that?
Please.
I had one question about the athletics line.
Yep.
Because it was the same from July to November, and how I was curious how that is the same. We didn't even have all of our sports. I was just curious, but if that's a bigger question, you can answer at the next meeting. It's not urgent.
So I'd like to look at that again. The budgeted figure for 21 is based upon the FY20 figure. Obviously, fees have either been reduced or nixed, and we did have a carry forward. If I may, Malaya, I'd like to postpone that until our next discussion, please.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
The budget calendar. I'm sorry, all set to go, Ken?
Sure, go ahead.
The budget calendar, we talked about this at our last meeting. Obviously, nothing happened in November. We updated this, and you can see, hopefully, in the italicized font here in December and January, that I added 2 additional meetings. Again, we had talked about this at our last meeting. With business and finance, I didn't put any dates there. We'll have to fine tune these dates for sure. But it's also another meeting that was added in January relative to the FY22 budget discussion. So those were the changes per the committee's request. And again, just deleting any reference to any activity for November.
Malaya, do you have your hand raised?
Any questions?
Malaya, do you have a question? Because you have your hand raised, but it might have just been raised.
Oh, no,
before.
it's from a long time ago. I'm sorry. I should take it down. Sorry.
I don't think that Megan is here at the moment. I know she's been bouncing in and out, but I think it's a question for Chair Weeks about process for discussions with the school committee, and perhaps we can come back to that briefly if she does return to the meeting, in terms of how she wants to process the school committee's input. I know we've talked in the past about priority setting ahead of budget setting. I think that maybe this goes beyond our committee's purview, but we've made some curricular changes to the district based on finances this year, and some co-curricular changes to the district, and it's going to be a difficult year next year, but there probably should be some space in the budget calendar that's not necessarily like Dan's situation, right, in terms of this is what we can afford and what we want to ask the towns for, but more of a philosophical discussion about what comes back first, or what gets cut next, into their somewhere. So again, that might be a conversation for the chair. In terms of town meetings, I assume various town meetings which are listed in May are still, there's no change in those dates, or do you know what those dates are? Have they been set? Because that's kind of the first one sets their calendar, right?
It does. I don't have the dates for the May town meetings, but as of now, I'm going to assume that the spring town meetings will be back on schedule from the previous years. For example, Paxton this year, they didn't have their town meeting until August. Sterling didn't have their town meeting till the middle of June, or the latter part of June, if I recall. That was, the better part of 4 to 6 weeks beyond when they normally have it. So again, this is all something to change based upon the state budget, but also based upon what's happening with the pandemic and where we are. Are we remote? Are we in? Are we still doing everything virtual? There are so many unknowns. But when I did this, I made the assumption that we're going to have a vaccine, and that we're going to be in a much better place come the springtime, and the normalcy that we knew. And again, this is me talking to myself at 3 o'clock in the morning. The normalcy that we knew is going to kind of be back. At least that's
I think it's a good assumption for next year's budget, but I wouldn't assume anything from the town. This might be a Daryl question in terms of his meetings with the town managers. But even if everything goes well with the pandemic, the towns might be looking to push back their town meetings just because of uncertainties in state budgets. And if they all push back and that gives us a different window, it might give us more wiggle for us to know more before we have to send them a budget. So I just throw it out there that, as we move through the process, it's worth Daryl asking the town managers, hey, is there a plan to still have them on time or not? Because that sets your clock, right? For whenever Sterling has their meeting.
Ken, I hate to
Yes.
butt in here, but I reached out to the town clerks just to get an idea, and I'll let you know what they say.
Great, Rebecca, thanks. Anyone else, or should Joe move on? Okay, why don't you go ahead? I'm Joe. I'm sorry, Dan, go ahead.
Okay. So the next is a follow-up. We had this on the agenda regarding the October 1 count, the enrollment numbers and the impact on the budget. I did include, and actually let me jump to that section in my narrative. Give me 30 seconds to get back to that discussion up here for the viewing audience. Let me shrink this just a tad. There we go. So we had talked about this at our last meeting, and I did include an update. These figures that were reported to the DESE. There's a slight variance of 2 students from what Superintendent McCall had reported. And as you can see, our numbers are down a little bit over 6%. This does, as we talked about at our last meeting, it does have an impact upon our foundation budget. However, if indeed we are held harmless, then hopefully we won't be financially penalized. There are so many unknowns with the 22 budget, and again, here we are, December 1st, and we're still without a state budget for FY21. I'm not hearing much in terms of my circles as to when the conference committee will get their work done. And the governor's 22 budget, at least as of now, is supposed to be coming out in a little bit under 8 weeks, the latter part of January. Will that happen? I don't know. I guess we'll probably find out later on this month. But that being said, as we said earlier tonight, they delayed the implementation of the SOA in 21. That impacted our Chapter 70. That's why we're seeing a reduction of $408,000 and change. Number 2, that impacted circuit breaker. That's why we're not seeing the phase in of reimbursement for transportation. As I wrote here, and as the commissioner stated recently, 6,000 students across the state have left public schools for homeschooling or even private schools. That's a huge figure. And there's also been some talk that the state may be releasing a second, and I wrote about this in my first paragraph, a second October 1 count, meaning giving districts across the state the opportunity to report numbers maybe in February, based upon where they're at. Those discussions have been few and far between, but they were discussions that were held weeks past relative to the October 1 count. So at the end of the day, as Jay Sullivan would often say, your mileage may vary. Stay tuned, and I guess we'll know better. Will these figures, as they were reported, be the be-all, end-all for FY22 Chapter 70, or will there be a second opportunity to report October 1 numbers, albeit February or late January, and will that help districts in terms of their Chapter 70? So many unknowns at this point in time.
A quick question about the PK numbers. So 66, I didn't do the math, I'm sorry, but if I was to add, the column that says difference, right? If I go across and add those numbers up, do those add up to minus 426? Because my question of why they may or may not is, are the PKs half counters or are they whole counters?
They are half counters, I believe. Right.
So it could be 33 better than 426?
Yes.
In terms of, so I just can't, I was just trying to do the mental math quickly, 130, 240, I don't know. I'll pull out my calculator, but that would be a difference, right? My other comment, just as an observation, as I'm trying to do math, so don't move the screen, is let's not assume that doing a second count is necessarily going to be good for us, because with our, nothing to do with with Dan, but with our not great performance so far, I can imagine us losing more rather than gaining. So yeah, the 426 is all of them, so it probably is 33 better than that. If that's, is that, so it's not minus 6% of our counters, but minus 6% of actual bodies. So actually only 393 instead in terms of actual counting humans.
And Ken, if I may, just as a point of clarity,
Yeah.
I just make that statement, of perhaps a second October 1 count. I mean,
Yeah.
those were discussions, weeks ago. I've not heard anything in the interim. I did receive a communication from Maz, as you know, where that was put out there. I believe Mars is advocating for that. I guess to your point, maybe a second October 1 count. If that were in February, for example, maybe that doesn't help us. I guess it's a luck of the draw, so to speak. Maybe we stay with our numbers and go forward.
Yeah, minus 6% is one of the highest ones in the state for regionals. I mean, I looked through the list of all the regional districts, and there aren't really any higher. Some are even on the positive, oddly enough, some of the high school regional districts. But yeah, that's 6,000 students. We own a good share of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess the question is there a chance that comes back positive to us, as this stated, that it's approximately, and many of them will come back to school in person once instruction resumes. Now, did they assume hybrid or did they assume full in time? Well, I'm not, as you related to your statement in there, Dan.
So that's a great question, Ben. Again, I'm assuming that if students come back, that they're coming back hybrid. Again, we're remote until the middle of January here, and that clearly, as you can see, that's having a huge impact on our numbers. I guess if for whatever reason that gets delayed because there is an incredible surge, and we're forced to shut it down. And again, I'm just reading the tea leaves here. That we not having a second October 1 count probably works to our benefit, because although I don't know, losing students in the middle of the year, it doesn't seem like that's possible. But anything is possible, I guess.
Yeah.
No, it is anecdotally. It is. I can tell you. I think it is happening. there's bigger discussions with these numbers for another body, but I know I watched the Board of Ed meeting last week, and statewide the biggest numbers were pre-K and K. So I am kind of amazed that our kindergarten numbers are so small, which is, I guess, a good thing. I mean, the change is small. But I certainly wonder what's going on in first grade and third grade, and that's a much bigger question, but clearly there's something going on there. So hopefully we can figure that out, because I think this is a bigger discussion, so I hope it is being had or will be had by the full committee or whoever needs to have it. But I hope we have done some queries of these families to perhaps find out why they're leaving, and I know we know sort of where, but statistically, you know, if they're homeschooling, they might come back. If they're private school, they might decide they really like those schools and stay. And I think that's, you know, it's not all. I don't want to make the false assumption that they'll all come back because COVID is over, because I don't think, from what I know and have heard and what we saw in our data at our last school meeting about public and private breakdowns, I don't think that's a guarantee. And I think it's something we need to pay attention to and dig a little deeper to find out, because I think we might be surprised. I also wonder if all those pre-K students and all the first graders in particular come back, where are we going to put them all? Because those are a lot of students. If they do come back, that's great. But staffing wise and building wise, that's a lot of kids to come back at one time. So I hope we have a plan for that.
I think, Malia, too, that this chart is saying what it's saying, but I think within our own district, it's really, we should be looking diagonally.
Yeah.
Right. Because comparing up and down is misleading, just even looking at it quickly, because I think we just have some small classes here and there. So
yeah, I was actually just kind of crunching those numbers just because I was curious about it. And if we look, like, just again, if you do it diagonally, not counting PK, so like last year's kindergartners who are this year's first graders, it's a drop of 291. But interestingly, even within that, the biggest chunk of that, last year's 8th graders to this year's 9th graders, a drop of 105, which is kind of mind-boggling. Because one of the things, like, if you just do the year-on-year comparison, one of the things that gets washed is that, in general, or at least there's a bit of a downward trend that we're kind of still on, in that, like, you drop a 500 person senior class and you replace it with a 420 person kindergarten class. That's a net drop in of itself of 60 some. So, I mean, it does highlight that, but I think there's like a year-on-year reduction in student population might get washed out when you're as part of some of this. But that 105 drop though into the high school is kind of a bit of an eye opener that you kind of have to peel back and take a look at, going from 599 to 494.
That's probably pretty typical. We lose a lot of kids in that transition to private schools going into high school. I mean, this is probably a conversation for a different committee, but I guess the question is that more than typical. I don't know the answer to that.
And just an FYI, one of the private schools in the area opened up a middle school this year, St. John's out in Shrewsbury. So not that they've got hundreds in the 7th and 8th grade, but that may impact some of these numbers here. Just a thought. Ken, I'm just being mindful of the time, and we've got a few more things to talk about here.
Yeah, let's move along. I do think this is a conversation for a different committee, but one that, you know, the conversation we're having now, that is.
All right. So may I move on to the COVID cost?
Yes, please.
All right. So going to shift gears here. And this chart was in your packet, but as I wrote, I was going to drill down on the PPE supplies. So first of all, and you have this in your packet, and then in your packet as well, I included a lot of backup. I ran the budget reports And then I also gave you the detail, but this is kind of a quick summary. As the committee knows, we this year are in receipt of 2 federal grants and 1 state grant relative to COVID. The big grant obviously is the school reopening grant, the 1.5. As I stated earlier, there are some costs allocated here. For example, the admin salary, that's overtime cost for our HVAC technician. The 115 includes, I'm sorry, the 105 is a food service staff. I think I had said 112, it's 105,000 that we use to pay food service staff. But the big number in here obviously is $623,710, just shy of $624 that was budgeted in this grant for PPE supplies, and we spent just under 54,000. So there's just under 570,000 still to be spent. But again, going to skip down here. As you can see, in the general fund, it wasn't budgeted, but in the general fund, we're just under $600,000 that are for the most part COVID related / PPE cost. And the PPE cost in the general fund, again, not budgeted, almost 557,000. And so we will be looking to shift some of those costs from the general fund to the grant where applicable. But the school reopening grant was the primary funding source, if you will, for the PPE supplies. There was also in the ESSER grant just under 88,000 allocated, and we've spent that 88,000. And then in the tech grant, 146,000 was allocated, and there was nothing, excuse me, in that grant. That grant we used solely to purchase technology, to purchase Chromebooks, and also to purchase some hotspots for technology. Are there any questions about these 3 grants here, especially relative to the PPE cost?
So I had a couple questions. One, for the PPE cost, the showing what money has been spent, is that stuff that has already been ordered we have on hand, or is that orders that have been put in that, like, does that include orders that have been put in that haven't shipped yet? I guess I'm trying to get an understanding of, like, have we already spent all of the grant money that we were looking to spend on PPE? Have we already gotten it, or do we still have kind of more that we've earmarked for future purchases?
So the cash out the door is just under $54,000. There's still money allocated there to be spent, and it will be spent in either through additional purchases, or we'll be looking to make adjustments, because as you can see in the general fund, we've spent almost 557,000. We've spent year to date 336,000 and change, and we have encumbered 220,000 and change in the general fund. So again, looking to take some of these costs and shift them from here up here to reduce that that balance there, as well as to order additional supplies using these dollars here.
Sorry, I had asked, I think, the wrong line. So that 556,508 for PPE supplies, and that line in the general fund, that the money that we have already spent. Does that account for checks that we've already written and PPE that we have received, or is some of that orders that we've placed that haven't come in? Because what I'm trying to get at is, as of this moment, like, do we have all of the PPE that we've paid for, or do we have a bunch that we've paid for but hasn't come in yet? Because if it's the former, then we're probably going to be needing more PPE as the year goes on. But if we have more that we've ordered that hasn't come in yet, then maybe it might not be the same case.
So the checks have been written for $336,000 and change. That's cash out the door. We're waiting. There's an encumbrance here of $220,000. We're waiting on supplies, materials with that value there.
I can just reframe Carl's question, and I know Malay, you had a hand, but the way I'm hearing Carl's question, and I'm sorry if I'm hearing it wrong, is with what we've ordered and what we've got, do we anticipate that if we come back to school that we're going to have to order 500,000 more of stuff, or do we think we've ordered and received enough that's going to last us through the year?
So I'd have to, Ken, to look at the inventory. Typically, we look to have about 2 months in advance in stock. It's likely that we're going to need to place some additional orders. But again, we have this balance here, and part of that will be expended by shifting some of the cost here up here, but also looking to purchase some additional supplies and materials probably out of this grant here, and this is prior to the end of December.
So I guess it would be good to know downstream, like how much more we think we might have to spend in this PPE line through the end of the fiscal year, right? Like, and I'm Carl, if that's really your question, but I think that's an important question nonetheless.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it really is kind of a build off to what I was getting at, because the first part of it is you look at like 336 is check out money out the door, 220,000 is encumbered, which is for kind of order but not on hand. So roughly we've gotten 60%. We have 60% on hand of what we were projecting for. So there's another 40% that's kind of due in. But absolutely, the second piece of it is what does our burn rate look like for what we have got now, and then what it might look like once we got a bunch more students in the door in January. And then just real quick question, and I don't know, is there a document or something that kind of talks about or kind of lists basically like what you can spend the school reopening grant on, what you can't? Because it looks like there's about 164,000 available in it, which was kind of down at the bottom of your sheet, at least that you had sent out earlier. And so it could be a question of like what could that money get spent for, and what would be in the best interest of the district. So like, would personnel be an option? So like if it's been highlighted that we have a dire need for staff to do contact tracing, could you bring on a temporary hire to assist Director Keenan with contact tracing? Like, could that be something that the grant could fund? I saw the line there for admin, so maybe that could be an option. But I guess a question would be like, what can we use the grant for, and what can't we use a grant for?
So there is a listing, and I'm happy to provide the committee a copy of that. This grant here, though, the school reopening grant, this was retroactive to last March, and it ends on December 30th, 2020. So these dollars that are in this grant here, the school reopening grant, they must be fully expended by the end of December, which means that if there is a need to hire, an additional support person, for contact tracing, that position, because obviously that work is going to be beyond December of 20. That position, for all intents and purposes, would have to be paid out of the general fund.
So Malaya, you had a hand up, and
Yep, that's okay.
Yeah.
I have that was part of my question. And I'm sorry I had to turn my camera off. My internet was being weird. So one other question I had is that I think from all the other documentation you provided that this includes things like all the extra HVAC repairs and things we've been doing. Is that included in this?
No, well, Malay, I'm sorry. It is under the general fund.
Yeah.
We didn't build in HVAC repair under the school reopening grant because there was kind of a gray area relative to ongoing maintenance and not. And if the HVAC repair was COVID related, then the answer would be yes. But the reality is that that's been an issue in our buildings prior to COVID.
So it's included in this under the general fund section, but not the grant. So I appreciate that. One reason well, it's fine. It doesn't matter. But one reason I was asking is because I know some of the repairs are things that, for example, would have been perhaps done in conjunction with the towns later, like Paxton, for example, under other arrangements, had we not had to accelerate them because of COVID. So that's why I was curious about that. My second question is let's see. Oh, it's a more general question that I have been asked for this entire packet of information more than probably anything else this spring by members of the public in this summer. So I didn't know if there's any way to put even the summary document available. I know it's available upon request, but I know that our packets for our meetings aren't posted on the webpage routinely. But I was wondering if this particular bit of information could be in some way, because I've had a lot of requests from towns and residents about our COVID spending and how it's impacting our budget. And this chart is the most helpful piece of information I've seen with everything in one place thus far. So I think it would be very useful if there's some way to, make it available to them, perhaps. Even in superintendent's reports, they don't have all of this detail. And I know that because I've been asked and I went looking and I said, well, it doesn't have that level of detail. So I think it would be useful in some way. So I'm just throwing that out there for consideration.
So you're talking about just this one summary sheet?
Well, at
this
least
sheet
this
here
part.
in front of you?
I don't know who wants to go digging through all the details that you gave us, but if there was an easy way just to put it up somehow or to include it in Daryl's next report as COVID expenses, so everyone has this information, not just the public. I think other members of the committee may find it helpful because we've heard people asking about it since, all summer. What are we spending? What's the big picture? How is it impacting our budget? And this was a really useful pile of information from this chart and all the backup information you gave us. I found that really helpful because it's exactly what we've been asking for to keep track of. So we could see. And I know other people have been asking. So I guess they can all call your office and ask, or if it was somehow included, either if in Daryl's packet or just put on the website under a special notation, it might be very useful, at least from people who have been asking me.
Two things. Number one, my report will be part of Daryl's packet this week. My monthly this report will be in there.
Okay.
Secondly, I'll speak to the superintendent tomorrow, but more importantly to IT, and we'll figure out a place probably under COVID on the website to upload this document. I'll work with Barry and hopefully we'll get it up there by the end of the day tomorrow.
I don't want to create extra work. I just was thinking, even if this level of detail was in Daryl's report, which it's not always, it would be really helpful to be able to just refer people there and say, go look for it. If you want to read it, it's out there. Instead of everyone having to call central office looking for the information.
So my report will be in Dow's report, number one.
Okay,
But
thank
number
you.
two, we'll get the summary, this sheet here in front of you. You can still see it, right?
Yeah.
You're seeing this, right?
Yep.
We'll get this up on the website someplace,
Okay.
conspicuous, so,
No, it's just
other committee members, but the public can see it, and hopefully
Yeah.
this will answer their questions.
it's in the interest of transparency because I've been
Yeah.
asked for this information more than everything other than when are we coming back. So thank you.
So Rebecca, I think the issue is that Daryl's report in the public is only Daryl's report. Like Dan's report and the other reports don't get posted
Right,
to the
thank you.
website. So
Yes.
if
Oh,
if you and the
no, it should, it's the whole packet gets posted to the website.
Usually though, I've looked, I don't want to argue about it. I'm not arguing, but I looked up a couple of the recent ones and they didn't have the same level of detail that we get in business and finance. So maybe it's just that a smaller version gets put into his. I don't know. It didn't have all the financial backup like this has. So that was kind of the root of my question.
But what's posted on the website as the superintendent's report is the entire packet. Whatever you get is just
Thank you.
scanned as one document.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
I'll get this summary sheet. We'll get it up there and we'll have a link. We'll have some documentation on the homepage that will bring people to this summary sheet here. How's that?
Thank you. And it may be like only the board of selectmen and school committee care, but I think it would just save a lot of questions and be in favor of transparency, which we've been trying to do. So thank you.
So I have two quick questions. One, I heard you say this has to be expended by December 30th. So do we need to approve a transfer, or is that something you can do without our approval since it's to a grant?
You don't need to approve a transfer, Ken. What I was referring to is, if we're gonna take a sum of money out of the general fund here and move it over here, that's a journal entry. Those don't go before the committee.
Okay, but you need to do it before December 30th is what I'm hearing.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
So good. So that's, and that 500 and whatever that's lower off the screen, 535, I can't squint, 556. Was that already in the expenses we talked about earlier? So like,
Yes, it is. Yep.
so that'll be another 550 to the good from what we discussed earlier, an hour or so ago.
Right. Well, whatever we move out of here and move
Right.
up there, it'll just make it to the good. Right.
Right.
I don't
Well,
have the
that's-
exact figure, but yes.
Right. Well, that's good. The other question I have, I don't mean this to sound snarky, although it might, is I know allowable expenses Carl was talking about, but I guess it's a return school reopening grant. So if I was going to be a snarky member of the community, I'd be like, well, you really haven't reopened the schools, right? I mean, we have to some degree for special ed students. So were there any requirements about a certain percentage of students being back by a certain date to be able to, because like, we were buying PPE and there's no students and not a lot of teachers actually be using it. Are we going to run into any trouble about that downstream?
Not to my knowledge, no. No.
Okay. So does anybody else have questions about this line?
And as the committee knows, as Malaya stated, in this attachment in my packet, and for those who are here, I did include I think a tremendous amount of detail, a number of budget reports, and the backup to all these numbers here. So that's you don't see it here. This is the summary, but the committee saw all the backup. You can see the vendors. You can see kind of a quick snapshot of what was bought and so on and so forth. It's all in the detail in the report there, which you have.
Yeah, it is. Thank you for providing that. So seeing nothing else, do we want to move to your policy?
So Ken, I'm just being sensitive to time and also being responsive to the challenge that you gave me almost 2 hours ago. I'd like to postpone this particular item for this evening with the committee's permission, and so that you can move on to the approval of the minutes and confirm the next meeting, or suggested next meeting, and still meet our 2 hour limit.
Okay. Well, I don't think anyone's going to greatly object to that as long as we are keeping it on the docket eventually, and that the question I'll ask downstream is if legal looked at it, legal counsel. So, maybe before, if they haven't yet, before the time we bring it back, that's the question that'll probably get asked in discussion is, has Joe looked at the changes? Joe Bartulis.
Okay.
So, hearing no great objection to moving on, the next item on the agenda is I'll take a motion to approve the minutes of the November 2nd, 2020 meeting.
So moved.
So moved. Malaya, is there a second?
Yeah, second.
Okay, so is there any discussion about the minutes that were distributed to call the meeting? Seeing none. Member Gustafson?
Yes.
Member Ratmar?
Yes.
And Mills, yes. So those minutes are approved. Next on the agenda is the next meeting. In the absence of the chair of the subcommittee, I'm reluctant to set our next meeting, but what are we thinking in terms of a time frame, Joe, and what's going to be useful? Because the holidays are weird, that's like we don't want to meet too soon, but then if we don't meet before the holidays, things happen fast, right?
So
Dan,
I can reach out to Mike tomorrow and get a sense from him. Also, Dr. McCall isn't here tonight because he was making a presentation to Paxton about the either 21-22 budget. So let me speak to both, and I can circle back. We can get something out to the committee, and hopefully the next day or two or three by the end of the week. How's that?
Yeah, I think that's fine. We want to make sure we have new things to talk about, right? But we also want to make sure we don't wait so long that we get into that like 24th to 2nd window, and then all of a sudden we're talking about budgets, right? So we'll leave that to yours and Chair Dennis's discretion, unless people want to chime in.
No, I think that's logical. My concern is waiting too long because, as I said, there hopefully will be transportation information coming our way in the near future, and that will impact a lot of things. And hopefully we'll have a state budget soon, and that will also impact things. So I just think I just want to make sure that it's sooner rather than later, because I've observed a trend of, well, we don't have new information and put things off, and then we'll be in January, a week before school starts, and not really knowing if there are things we need to sort out. So
Dan, even if we are just talking about transportation and your policy, and it's a shorter meeting, like at least that gets, and I don't know where your contract is, if that was talked about at one of my meetings, I wasn't here. But if those things that always keep getting pushed off could be on a meeting that has a shorter top of the agenda, that could be an argument for an early December meeting as well. Yeah.
Ken, if you want to talk about my contract at the next meeting, we can book one next Monday at 6 o'clock.
Yeah. So if you can reach,
I'll sign it.
So if you could reach out to Mike and Daryl and figure out how that looks, I think that would be good.
Little levity. Will do. Thank you.
All right. So
Malaya?
No, I was just laughing because we have a meeting Monday at 7.
That's why I said I'm happy to sign at 6 o'clock next Monday night.
And there's another subcommittee at 6, so it'd have to be even before that. It's a long story. I'm a little sensitive about meetings on the same night because this is the second time I've had 2 meetings on the same night, and it's not our fault. We were scheduled in advance, but I'm very not school committee meetings. I'm sensitive about subcommittees on the same night, so hopefully that would be avoided. But anyways, I digress. I'm sorry. Monday's fine. Whenever you figure out.
So Joe has sacrificed. Dan has sacrificed. I'm getting really tired tonight. Dan has sacrificed his meeting on the agenda to try and get us in under 2 hours. So let's see if we can actually accomplish that. If that's all right, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, moved and seconded. So all in favor, Malaya?
Yes.
Carl?
Yes.
And Mills, yes. Dan, thanks so much for all of the work that went into this. I know it's a lot of pulling numbers, and please let us know if there's ways we can support you as we move forward into this weird, uncertain time.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you all.
Okay.
All right. Take care,
Thank
all.
you.
Good night.
Thanks. And Rebecca, are we all set?
All set, Ken.
Thank you for minute taking tonight. I appreciate that.
No problem.
And we got it in.